Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Innistrad Crimson Vow spoilers. And the last couple of weeks, we've been going over the main set. Well, today is Commander Precon Day. We got both of the Commander Precons. We got a ton of cards to talk about, like 30 some new cards, which means it's going to be a long video. Buckle up, find a seat. We should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Commander Precon cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. One is, if you want to keep up on all the latest previews, you can find them all over at mtgpreviews.com. Number two, our video today is brought to you by Card Kingdom. And if you need any of these cards, or any Crimson Vow cards, or really any Magic cards, you can get them over at cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. Even get a free MTG Goldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes, and they'll hook you up. So anyway, let's talk Innistrad Crimson Vow Commander. So we're kicking things off today with the cards from the Azuria Spirit deck led by Millicent, Restless Revenant. And we're not going to talk about Millicent. We covered it in a daily spoiler video a few days ago. Click on the card if you want to see a description and a full breakdown of Millicent. But I want to remind you what the deck was about. It's led by Millicent. It's all about spirits. Millicent makes spirits. It makes themselves cheaper based on spirits on the battlefield. And we got a lot of cards that work with that theme, including our first of our three-ish backup commanders, Donald Herald of Wings, which actually works pretty well with Millicent in a weird way. But Donald, oh my goodness, this is one of my favorite cards from the deck. 4 mana 3/3 human wizard. It's a legend, and it says whenever you cast a non-legendary creature with flying, you can copy it, except the copy's a 1/1 spirit in addition to its other types. Only get to do it once each turn, which is kind of annoying. But essentially, you cast a Muldrifter, and you're going to get a 1/1 spirit Muldrifter as well. So this is a way in a Millicent deck or any spirit deck that you can turn non-spirit, non-legendary flyers into spirits to support your tribal synergies. But really, I'm mostly excited about building around Donald as my commander. I'll play in the 99 of some decks as well that have a lot of flyers, but as a commander, this card is really sweet, like a super Panharmonicon from the command zone, 4 flyers. So what I'm envisioning is you play Donald, then you play Muldrifter, and you get a 1/1 Muldrifter that's a spirit on top of the normal one in draw 4. Play a Diluvian Primordial and cast a ton of spells from the graveyard, steal 2 things with Sower of Temptation, bounce 2 things with Riffling Crowdskate, and these are all creatures that their power comes from their enters the battlefield trigger rather than their size. Like a 1/1 Muldrifter, not significantly worse than a 2/2 Muldrifter. It's kind of the same thing. And those are the type of cards that work the best with Donald. Like the drawback of Donald, outside of the once per turn restriction, is your creature that you get the copy of is going to be really, really small. It's just a 1/1. So you don't want to try to play big, huge beatdown things. You want to play things that are getting their value in other ways. One of my favorite ways to build this is the combo build of this deck with things that untap your land. So I'm thinking like Cloud of Fairies, Peregrine Drake, and then especially Palinchron. These cards are insane with Donald. Like, you cast a Cloud of Fairies. Cloud of Fairies, 2 mana 1/1. When it comes into play, you untap 2 lands. Normally, it's just a free spell. But if you're getting 2 of them, you untap 4 lands, or untap the same 2 lands twice. You float your mana in between. So it's essentially generating mana. You're turning 2 mana into 4 mana if you have bounce lands or things that tap for multiple mana. Then it gets even crazier. Or like Peregrine Drake. 5 mana, untap 5 lands. Well, with the Donald out, you're going to get 2 of them. So you're going to untap 10 lands. So you're essentially generating 5 mana. And then the easiest combo to win the game is just Donald into Palinchron. Palinchron, when it comes into play, you untap 7 lands, but then you can pay 4 and return Palinchron to its owner's hand. So essentially, Palinchron can go infinite if you get up to like 12 mana, but Donald speeds that up greatly. With a Donald out, you can get up to 7 lands, play Palinchron. Your Palinchron will untap those lands twice because you get the token copy of it, float your mana in between. That's going to give you 7 extra mana. 4 of it picks up Palinchron, and then you start the process again. Then you start the process again. Then you start the process again and make infinite mana and use the infinite mana to win the game somehow. So Donald Palinchron, probably the easiest, most straightforward combo for this card. Also pretty good is the Sphinx commander. Like Consecrated Sphinx draws a ton of cards, is a static ability. Having 2 of those is kind of absurd. Or like Wind Reaver Sphinx. Whenever you attack with a creature with flying, you get to draw a card. Well, having 2 of those is going to draw you twice as many cards. So those are the kind of synergies I think you're looking to build around with Donald. I also think it's a pretty good 99 card as long as you keep in mind what Donald wants. Like Innistrad, Kangi, these are like flying tribal commanders. You do got to make sure you're not paying too many legends. If you have a ton of legends, then Donald's not going to be very good. But as long as you don't have a ton of legends, I think this is just a really good option for the 99 in any flying tribal based deck. Also seems really sweet in the 99 of spirit decks, especially spirit decks with flying, from 5 color down to mono blue style decks. So if you play a lot of spirits naturally have flying, like Drog Skull Captain, Supreme Phantom, Windborn Muse. Belfry Spirit. I mean, Drogskill Captain's one of the best options. You play it, it gives all your other spirits hexproof. You get that 1/1 copy of it. Well, it is also going to give your spirits hexproof, which means they give each other hexproof, and you essentially have a hexproof lock. Remember, Donald, it does make the token copy into a spirit, but it works fine with spirits as well. There's no restriction against playing spirits, so this seems like a great card in any spirit deck that's playing a lot of flyers, getting double Drogskill Captains, double Supreme Phantoms, Windborn Muse to lock out combat, Belfry Spirit to make a ton of tokens. So Donald's a really sweet card. This is a really fun build around legend that also can just be thrown into spirit decks with lots of flyers, or flying tribal decks, bird tribal decks, and give you a lot of value. So really cool new mythic human wizard coming in Commander 2021. We also got a partner pair of commanders. Each of the 2 commander decks today is one of our backup commanders get a partner pairing. So in the Azorius deck, we get Rhoda and Timon. So Rhoda, a white 4-mana 3/3 human soldier with vigilance that says whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, if it isn't being declared as an attacker, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Timon is a 5-mana 3/4 that has flying, and at the beginning of each combat, you get to tap up to 1 target creature. So essentially, if you get them both out, Timon gets to tap something down, which grows Rhoda and also clears the way for Rhoda to attack. So you get this weird kind of playstyle. This is like Azorius tap down Voltron. I guess the best comparisons for these cards, Rhoda is kind of like Gideon's Avenger, with the downside that combat doesn't trigger it, and then Timon is kind of like a watered down but much cheaper tidal force. So I think the way you build around this is with as many tap shenanigans as possible. The downside is there's not many cards in all of Magic that care about your opponent's creatures being tapped. Verity Circle's probably the best. Whenever your opponent has a creature that becomes tapped that isn't going to combat, you get to draw a card. So great card advantage for a Timon Rhoda deck. Also, Palatian Accord, I guess, prevents a bunch of damage based on the same thing. But really, there isn't a lot of just straight up cards that's like, oh, when your opponent's creatures become tapped and they're not going to combat, do something. But I think there is a way to build this deck. I think the easiest way to build it is try to protect Rhoda, get the Swiftfoot Boots, the Lightning Greaves, the Darksteel Plate on Rhoda, so you can keep growing it, and then start casting cryptic commands in Sleeps, and Tempest Callers, and Blinding Lights, and Tangle Wires, all these mass tap effects where you have an opponent who has 5 creatures, or 7 creatures, or 10 creatures, and you tap them all down with a Sleep, then all of a sudden Rhoda is going to get really, really huge, really fast. You're getting a counter for each creature that becomes tapped down. So I think that's the easiest way to build this weird tap down Voltron, and then Timon is kind of just helping along the way, giving you the ability to tap down 1 creature each turn, clear the way for an attack, while also working with your Rhoda synergies. If you want to build around Timon, which does seem like the weaker of the partner pairing, like 5 mana for something that taps something each turn doesn't seem that great. There are a few cards that are good with it, cards that just care about a creature being targeted, like Willbreaker. When a creature an opponent controls become the target of a spell or ability, you gain control of that creature. So then instead of tapping creatures with Timon, all of a sudden you're yoinking them. Or Cowardice. When a creature becomes targeted, it gets bounced. Or Dismiss into Dreams. When a creature becomes targeted, it gets sacrificed. So there are a few cards that can really power Timon up. So I don't think this is a super strong partner pairing, Rhoda and Timon, but it is a unique partner pairing. But we've never had tap your stuff outside of combat matters commanders before, so it is really unique. It does seem fun to build around, and probably it isn't mid to low power partner pairing. We also got perhaps one of the best white cards for Commander that we've gotten in a very long time. Storm of Souls. 6 mana sorcery. Return all creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. Each of them is a 1/1 spirit with flying in addition to its other types. Exile Storm of Souls. So that's right. White can now reanimate every single thing from your graveyard for 6 mana, which is insane. This is something White has never been able to do before. We've talked about White needing more card draw, but one of the ways to get around that is just giving White more card advantage. It doesn't have to say straight up draw a card to be card advantage. Storm the Souls is kind of an insane amount of card advantage, giving you a bunch of creatures back from the graveyard, even though it doesn't actually say draw a card. So Storm of Souls, we've seen like Triumphant Reckoning, mass reanimation for enchantments, artifacts, and planeswalkers. We've seen Face Reward, can reanimate everything, but only the stuff that went to graveyard for a turn. Angel Glory Rise, mass reanimation, but only for a specific tribe. We have never had a card like this in White, and I think this card is insane. Also worth mentioning, mentioning, it actually just reanimates the creatures. It's really weird. Past versions of cards like Storm the Souls, like Scarab God or God-Fearers Faithful, tend to like exile the creatures and put them back as a token copy. Storm the Souls is actually reanimating the cards. They just happen to be 1/1s in spirits rather than their normal types, which is actually pretty relevant when you think about what this card can do as far as blink shenanigans and other shenanigans. So this card, I think, is just a generic white staple. As long as you have a lot of creatures in your deck, this card's going to be great. Just play any random white deck and cast this and get back your Sun Titan or your Elish Norn or your Avacyn, whatever, getting back a whole bunch of stuff at once. Sure, they're going to be 1/1s, but that's fine. You're still getting a ridiculous amount of card advantage, getting enter the battlefield triggers and other shenanigans, and it might be even better outside of mono white. Surprisingly, this effect just isn't that common. We have like Rise of the Dark Realms, which is about 1,000,000 mana, reanimates everything, but even black doesn't just get straight up mass reanimation, so Nethroi or Sephiroth or Cardor, these white X3 color decks could definitely want this card. I think it also has a lot of potential in aristocrat style decks. You see decks that use like Rally of the Ancestors to like sack all your creatures to a Viscera's Ear, get a bunch of Blood Artist triggers, and then reanimate them all and then sack them all again. Storm of Souls kind of does the same thing, just easier, and if you are sacking your creatures anyway, you don't really care that they're 1/1s. Like, that is the drawback, is your Sun Titan is going to be a 1/1 instead of a 6/6, but if you're just sacrificing all your stuff, you don't really care what their power is, because the power of the creature is that they're generating Blood Artist triggers or doubling up with Tisa Karlov, not their actual stats. The other important part about this card, the reason why it's important that this doesn't exile and make tokens and it just reanimates the creatures as 1/1s, is it means it works with blink shenanigans. So you can like Storm the Souls, reanimate all your stuff, and then Yarion to blink your stuff, and then all of a sudden your Sun Titan is a 6/6 again rather than a 1/1, or use Brago to blink all your stuff. Then you get all your real creatures again, plus you get all your enter the battlefield triggers again, because you got them once when you cast it, once with Storm the Souls, once again when you blink your stuff. So it certainly has potential there as well. So this card is just insane. I think this is a generic white staple for white decks with lots of creatures. White just hasn't had anything like this, and it goes up even more in value in blink decks, in reanimator decks, in decks that are built around filling their graveyard. So Storm of Souls, this card is kind of insane, and I really, really love it. Next up, we have a very white card, Priest of the Blessed Graph, a 3-mana 1/2 human cleric that says, at the beginning of your end step, create X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of opponents who control more lands than you. So this is a card that calls back to a lot of other white cards. One of white's weird mechanics is, if your opponent has more lands than you, I do something. Land tax, for example, Knight of the White Orchid, Verge Ranger. So this is something we've seen in white quite a bit. Priest of the Blessed Graph, I don't especially like. I don't think this card is going to be all that good, but we'll have to see. Like, cards like Land Tax do trigger, Knight of the White Orchid does ramp, but there is risk here. They're not always going to trigger. And when you think about Priest of the Blessed Graph in specific, how many spirits do you got to be making each turn for this to be worth it? Like, if you're making 1 spirit, is it worth it? Maybe. If you're making 2 or 3 spirits, then it definitely is, but how consistently is that going to happen? How consistently is your opponent going to have more lands than you? That is the question, because there are going to be games in times where you play this and it's just a 3-mana 1/2, which isn't that exciting. It's nice that it triggers on your end step, but there's plenty of cards that can make spirit tokens. I don't really know if you need Priest of the Blessed Graph, even if it is a cool design. If you want to kind of build around it, you can try to pick up your own lands. That's one way you can have less lands than your opponent use, like Hallowed Ground or Carews or Ajurious Chanceries, just to keep some of your lands off the battlefield. I think it does go up in value if you're playing a dedicated spirit token build of spirits. I think in spirits in general, in a vacuum, I don't think this card's worth it. If you're beating down with flying spirits, like, this just isn't going to do enough. It's not going to be consistent enough. But if you're playing a spirit token deck and you got Anointed Processions and you're playing Phantom Generals, then I think this definitely is in the conversation, because like I said, if you're getting 2 or 3 spirits each and every turn in the first batch coming on your end step, not your next upkeep, so you're getting that immediate value, then Priest of the Blessed Graph is pretty good. Just keep in mind, there is potential for this to be inconsistent. If you've ever seen a land tax on the battlefield, sometimes it looks like the most busted white card in Commander. Other times, it just sits on the battlefield and does literally nothing. Priest of the Blessed Graph, I guess at least you always get a 1/2 body, but really, it's going to be kind of the same. We also got, oh boy, a very scary scary spirit payoff in Drogskull Reinforcements, 4 mana 2/2 spirit token. It has melee, so whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent you attack this turn. So essentially, Commander, if you attack each of your opponents, you're going to get +3/+3 because you attack 3 opponents. So this would be a 5/5 when it attacks. But more importantly, this gives your other spirits melee, and it prevents all non-combat damage out to spirits you control. So you survive like a blasphemous act or whatever, which is a nice bonus. But I think this is mostly scary because of that giving your other spirits melee mode. Like, imagine just casting a Spectral Procession and making 3/1/1s, and then following it up by this, and attacking each of your opponents with one of the spirits. They're all going to become 4/4s. That's a lot of damage, and spirits is pretty good at going wide with evasive creatures. You got Midnight Hunt, you got Belfry Spear. A lot of the just natural spirits also have flying. Drogskull Captives, Rattle Chains, Kira the Great Glass Spinner. So I think that you can just build a big board of evasive creatures and then stick this and slam your opponents for a ton of damage. So I actually think this is a really good payoff. If you're playing spirit tokens, if you're playing an evasive spirit deck with a bunch of flyers, I think this is a great mid-game play to just pour in a bunch of damage. Also seems really good in Yobi, who split the heavens, because Yobi, when you cast a spirit, makes a 3/3 spirit with flying. Gonna be a lot of damage that way. So Drogskull Reinforcements, I actually really like this card a lot and think it's definitely worth playing in a reasonable amount of spirit decks. Also, shout out to melee, which is exactly the kind of commander mechanic I like, because it incentivizes you to attack the whole table. One of the things I dislike about commander, we've been talking about this with some of the new curses, like a Curse of Hospitality. It incentivizes the whole table to gang up and basically kill one person, which isn't always a fun play pattern. I feel like Drogskull Reinforcements, it's the opposite. It basically encourages you to attack everyone and spread the love, which I think is a really good way for a commander game to be played. We also got Hunted Library, 2 mana enchantment. When a creature an opponent controls dies, you can pay 1. If you do, you make a 1/1 spirit creature token with flag. So Hunted Library, I don't know about playing this card fairly. It feels a little bit slow, leaving up mana when your opponent's stuff dies. I don't know if it's going to be worth it. There are some shenanigans, like if you play this with Grave Pact or Dictated Erebos and Ashnod's Altar. I know, Ashnod's Altar combo, we broke it finally. Who would have thought that card would finally be a combo piece? But you can like sack a creature to make 2 mana to force your opponents to sack a creature each, and that's going to let you pay the 1 with the Ashnod's Altar mana to make a spirit, which you can then sacrifice to Ashnod's Altar to trigger the Grave Pact to force your opponents to sacrifice. So essentially just rest the entire table. So I think there can be like aristocrat style decks that would actually want this. If you're playing Grave Packs and you happen to be in white, then I think Haunted Library goes up in value a lot more. On the other hand, I don't know, maybe you could just play it fairly and cast a Wrath of God and use all of your mana to make a bunch of spirits. That's something, but just keep in mind that 1 mana is going to add up. Like, that is a lot of mana to leave up during your opponent's turn in hopes of a creature dying in combat or something. So it is going to get a little bit expensive, but I think the best home, definitely aristocrat style deck, something like Tisa Karlov, maybe Tisa Orzhov Scion, where you're kind of built around these sacrifice effects and looping stuff from the graveyard, sacrificing stuff from value, and then presumably having the Grave Pact, Dictative Erebos effects thrown in, and just triggering on your natural removal spells, because Hunted Library does keep giving you fodder. If you can pay for it, you're going to keep getting spirits, which you can use as sacrifice fodder to hopefully support your other synergies. So I think that's probably the best home. But would I just slam this in Spirit Tribal? Probably not. We also got Sudden Salvation, 4 mana instant. Choose up to 3 permanents in graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control. You draw a card for each opponent who controls 1 or more of those permanents. So Sudden Salvation, it's kind of like a expensive bad brought back mixed with a watered down faith reward. Like, when you think about what this card does compared to other options, it doesn't actually look all that good. Like, brought back gets back 2 permanents from your graveyard for 2 mana. Face reward gets back all your permanents that went to the graveyard this turn for 4 mana, the same price as Sudden Salvation. So why would I ever play Sudden Salvation when I have these better options available? And I think there's 2 answers. One is you just want more redundancy. Like, sure, maybe it's not as good as brought back or not as good as face reward, but this is another card that gives you a similar effect. The other option is you're using this in a political style deck, like giving your opponent back a permanent is going to curry favor with them. Maybe you get a favor out of them later in the game. They'll owe you something. Plus you get to draw a card for it. I still don't think this necessarily makes the card playable though. I don't know. Like, I don't think it's horrible at all, but I think just better options exist. Probably the easiest thing to do it with your own deck is just crack a bunch of fetch lands and get them all back and turn it into a right ramp spell. But if you're doing that, brought back kind of does it much cheaper. Face reward does the same thing. I guess it's a fine follow-up to a wrath, either on your turn or your opponent's turn. Your opponent wraths, and you cast this and get your stuff back. But really, brought back or face reward kind of does the same thing but better. So Sudden Salvation, I like the commander twist on this card. I like the, if you give one of your opponents a thing back, you get to draw a card and you can do political games with it. But in general, if you're just playing this with your own cards and getting your own stuff back, I think there's just better options available in white. Next up, we got Breathless Spirit. So Breathless Spirit, 4-mana enchantment, lets you cast spirits as though they had flash. And whenever you cast a creature spell during your opponent's turn, tap up to 1 target creature. So Breath of the Sleepless, I kind of like this card. It's like a weird, spirity Leyline of Anticipation. Really, you're getting a Rattle Chains plus a Nibblegast Herald on moves. You're giving all your spirits flash, like Rattle Chains. Plus, whenever your spirit comes into play, or really any creature, if you're playing it during your opponent's turn, you get to tap something down. This is a pretty powerful combination of abilities. If you're worried about getting smacked by a big Voltron commander, you just flash in a spirit and tap that down. You can use it to clear the way by tapping down a bunch of stuff on the end step before your turn to get blockers out of the way, and then untapping and smashing your opponent for a ton of damage. So I think this is a pretty powerful card. I know it is a fair question whether it is better than Leyline of Anticipation, and I think the answer is yes if you're playing spirits. Like, the downside is your non-spirits aren't going to get flash, but the upside of tapping stuff down in a creature-heavy spirit deck, I think probably just makes Leyline of Anticipation better. Offers some nice synergy in the partner pair deck we were talking about before, a way to tap things down, which then grows your Rhoda, so it seems like a nice upgrade there. And spirits have some things that are pretty good being flashed in, like Drog Skull Captain, for example, giving your other spirits hexproof. You can wait until someone Swords to Plowshares, one of your creatures, or whatever removal spell, then you flash this in or fizzle it. Or maybe your opponent casts a Wrath. You can flash in a Selfless Spirit and then sack it to fizzle it, or sack in a Mausoleum Wanderer is a flashy counter spell. Plus, if you're playing a Azorius deck, you're going to have a lot of instant speed spells anyway, and being able to leave up your mana for a counter spell or a Swords to Plowshares, and if you don't need to cast one of these interactive spells, flashing a spirit, that's actually a pretty powerful play pattern. So Breath of Spirits, I kind of like it. If you're a creature heavy spirit deck, I think it's at least worth considering because it can do a lot of powerful things, and it plays well with how the tribe works, which is playing at instant speed, flashing stuff in, using these little tricky tapped out type synergies. We also got Ethereal Investigator, a 3-mana 2/3 spirit with, when it enters a battlefield, investigate X times, where X is the number of opponents you have. So in Commander, you should be making 3 clue tokens, and then whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So Ethereal Investigator is a spirit that I'm not actually all that excited to play in a spirit deck. I mean, it's a 4-mana 2/3. Spirits don't really have any investigate synergies. I mean, drawing extra cards is always fine. I'm never going to complain about having a clue on the battlefield, but I think this is a card that's actually designed for some other decks. I think this is an upgrade for the Min Wily Illusionist deck, a draw a second card commander. This seems designed specifically to go in deck. Can also play in Gavi, which also cares about drawing a second card each turn. So I think that's one home where this is going to be a really, really good option. The other place this fits is in clue tribal decks, commanders that just care about clues on the battlefield. And we also got Eloise recently. This is a great upgrade there. Sure, it isn't really a combo piece, but still it just puts more clues on the battlefield, which is what you want. It works really well with Lannis from Modern Horizons too. So Ethereal Investigator, even though it's a spirit and it's from a spirit precon, I think this is actually a card for other decks that can take advantage of its abilities even more than spirits. We also got Disorder in the Court, an Azorius instant, white, blue, and X, to exile X target creatures, then investigate X times, return the exiled cards to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So Disorder in the Court can make a bunch of clues and do a bunch of shenanigans. The first thing I thought of when I saw this card is it's kind of like a slow version of Eerie Interlude or Ghost Away. It's a way you can blink your own creatures with Enter the Battlefield triggers to reuse those Enter the Battlefield triggers. The downside of Disorder in the Court is it's a lot of mana. Like Eerie Interlude and Ghost Away, for 3 mana can just blink your entire team. Disorder in the Court, you're going to have to pay 10 mana to blink your whole team, depending on how many creatures, but it's going to take a lot. For the same amount of mana that Eerie Interlude costs, you are blinking a single creature and making a single clue token, which might not actually be worth it, but this is one of my favorite style of effects to play in Panharmonicon decks, where you can just loop it with Eternal Witnesses and blink your Muldrifters to draw more cards. So this is a really high value card. Plus, the twist of this, and where this kind of shines compared to something like Ghost Away, is you can use it to blink your opponent's creatures. maybe your opponent's got a lot of defense and you're trying to close out the game, you can cast this to get all their random defenders out of the way and then just get in that big attack, close out the game. Plus you're going to have a bunch of clue tokens on the battlefield, which is never a bad thing. So I think this card is probably going to be at its best in Blink style decks. I think that's the home. And even though it's a little bit expensive to get going, I think it's going to be worth it in decks like Brago and decks like Yarya. It also seems like a sweet upgrade for Raynar, I think, because Raynar cares about things getting exiled. Sure, you're only getting one spirit, but still that's a little bit of extra value, plus you're getting the glue tokens. So Disorder of the Core, we'll have to wait and see. I'm a little worried about just how expensive it is, but if you got a bunch of mana available, this is a really powerful effect that can do a lot of shenanigans with enter the battlefield triggers. Plus, you get a bunch of card draw clues left over for the next turn and in the future. We also got Occult Epiphany, 1 blue in X, instant, draw X cards, then discard X cards. Create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying for each card type among the cards discarded this way. So do a bunch of mass looting depending on how much mana you have, and then also make some number of spirits depending on how many card types you discarded. This card reminds me the most of Read the Runes. At its base, it's kind of the same thing. 1 blue in X, draw X, and then discard X. Read the Runes, you can sack permanents to get away from discarding. Occult Epiphany, you can't sack permanents, but you can make some number of spirits, probably between 1 and like 7 or 8 if you get really lucky. So some number of spirits. This is a card that I don't think I would play in a spirit deck. Like, sure, you do some filtering and maybe has some spirits, but it's not really card advantage. Its spirit making abilities are going to be inconsistent. I think this is a card that is primarily for the same decks that might play something like Read the Runes, which is decks that care about discarding cards or decks that care about drawing cards. Like Rael the Everwise wants you to discard a bunch of cards. Braylon and Shabraz, the partner pair, they care about discarding and drawing cards. Or Niv Mizzet, the Locust God, just want you to draw a bunch of cards. The upside of Occult Epiphany is it's cheaper than the other options. If you're Brain Geysering or Pull from Tomorrowing, those are more expensive to get going, so you get to draw more cards this way. Plus, you get to make a bunch of tokens, potentially some number of tokens to keep your life total high and do some chump blocking, which kind of takes away the downside of spending all your mana on this effect that doesn't really actually generate any card advantage. So I don't think I would play it in a spirit deck, but with commanders that care about you discarding cards, that care about you drawing cards, this could be something that's in the conversation at least. We also got one of the spiciest cards from the precon, Haunting Imitation, 3 mana sorcery. Each player reveals the top card of their library. For each creature card revealed that way, create a token that's a copy of that card except as the 1/1 spirit in addition to its other types, and it has flying. If no creatures were revealed that way, return Haunting Imitation to its owner's hand. So this kind of reminds me of Unexpected Results. Similar. If it whiffs, it goes back to your hand. If you hit a creature off your deck, you get to put it into play. The upside of Haunting Imitation is it hits everyone. So you could potentially, if you get really lucky, be getting 4 1/1s that are copies of creatures. Worst case is this whiffs and you don't get anything, which is a real possibility when you consider the amount of lands and mana rocks that are in a commander deck. The whiff potential is relatively high. I think you're hoping for something with some sort of good ability because the creatures are 1/1s, which is kind of a theme of the deck. I think you're really hoping to hit like an Avenger of Zendikar, because you don't really care if it's a 1/1, it's making a million plants and then growing them, or a Dockside Extortion is for manas, Consecrated Sphinx for lands. The downside is this is going to be mostly left up to chance. However, since Haunting Imitation triggers on everyone's library, including your own, there are ways that you can control it. You can use Worldly Tutor to make sure you have the Avenger of Zendikar or Consecrated Sphinx on top of your deck. You can try to set things up with Sensei's Divining Top. I think Scheming Symmetry is really cute. You tutor whatever you want to the top of your deck. Your opponent's going to tutor something on top of their deck. You can't really control what they're getting, but your opponent's not going to know that Haunting Intimidation is coming. So you kind of cross your fingers and hope they tutor up their best creature and you get the ability of that as well in a 1/1 spirit form. So I think Haunting Imitation is just really, really fun. Is this card good and competitive? Probably not. It's only making 1/1s. Your best case is hitting something with a good ETB trigger, really. But I think this card is just high variance, really fun, really hilarious, and I can't wait to cast it, even though I expect that it's probably not a good card. It's more just a card that's really, really sweet. We also got Spectral Arcanist. 4 mana, 3/2 Spirit Wizard with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of spirits you control from a graveyard without paying its mana cost, and then that spell goes to exile. So Spectral Arcanist, this card is kind of bonkers in a spirit deck. It's a little bit like Scholar of the Lost Trove, except you can hit anyone's graveyard, and it's only 4 mana. A little bit like Diluvian Primordial, since it hits anyone's graveyard, but you only get one of those spells, not one from each of your opponent's graveyard. this card seems like it offers a ton of value in a spirit deck, and I think it's at its best in some sort of blink spirit deck. Remember, this isn't a cast trigger, this is an ETB trigger, and spirit's got some good blink synergies. You got like Soul Herder, you got Deadeye Navigator. If you can build a big board full of spirits and keep blinking this, you're probably going to win the game. You can steal all the good spells from your opponent's graveyard. You can also build around it and try to get big spells into your graveyard, Blatant Thieveries, Clone Legions, Time Warps, and just use Spectral Arcanist to cast them for free. And in a spirit deck, spirits are so good at making tokens, it doesn't seem that unrealistic to be able to cast 7 mana spells, 9 mana spells with a Spectral Arcanist. So Spectral Arcanist, this card's really powerful. I think this might be the best spirit that we got from this precon deck. I expect if you're playing a deck that's got a lot of spirits, you basically just play this every time. This is super top tier Spirit Tribal support. So that was the spirit deck, which means now it's time to move on to deck number 2, the Rakdos Vampire deck, headlined by Strefan. So Strefan, we're not gonna get into it. We talked about it a week ago. Check out that video if you want to see a breakdown. But it's a good reminder of what the deck's about, which is vampires in blood tokens. So that is the theme of the deck. And we kick things off with backup commander number 1, Timitar, Baron of Bats. 6 mana, 4/4. Has Ward of discard a card. So a bit of protection, not a ton of protection, but that is some amount of protection for Timitar. And then its ability is pretty sweet. Whenever a non-token vampire you control dies, another one, so not Timitar, you can pay 1 and exile it. If you do, you make a 1/1 bat creature token with flying. It gains. When this creature deals combat damage to a player, sack it and return the exiled card to the battlefield tab. So essentially a way to protect your creatures. There is a bit of risk. You are exiling the creatures. So if the bat dies, you're going to lose that creature forever. You can't reanimate it later in the game or something. But still, this is a pretty powerful way to protect your team. Calls back to Deathpack Angel, kind of a creature that makes a token that can reanimate the Deathpack Angel. Or even Mikaeus is a 6-drop that can protect your creatures. The difference is Timitar, it requires a bunch of mana. You do need to leave up mana to protect your creatures when they die, but still, I think this is a card that is at least in the conversation for a lot of vampire decks. Not super excited to play Timitar as my commander, but in a Edgar Markov deck, or in a Lenda deck, or a Florian deck, whatever vampire deck, this is a nice top end that can help your team survive a wrath, help your best vampire survive removal. My only concern with Timitar is it is kind of expensive. Let's say you're worried about an opponent wrathing, and you got 5 vampires. You can pass your turn with 5 mana up and try to make a bunch of bats if your opponent does wrath, and then eventually hopefully get those creatures back. And I think the bats will be pretty good at getting creatures back. In Commander, you got 3 opponents you can attack. Someone probably won't have a flyer, so I think it is relatively consistent there. But passing your turn with 5 mana up in case your opponent wraths, that's a really big cost, because that means you're not casting stuff with that 5 mana. If your opponent doesn't wrath, it's going to be really, really bad. That said, black is pretty good at making a lot of mana. You got Cryptcast, you got Nocturnal Revenant, which is even a vampire. Even if you're 2-color vampires, you can play Urborg or something to have a lot of swamps. So maybe you can just naturally make enough mana that this isn't a downside. The other way to play it is not really try to protect all your creatures. Some of your vampires probably aren't that good anyway, but just use Timitar to protect your best creatures. Leave up a mana or 2 mana to protect your Butcher of Malakir, your Commander, your Edgar, your Bloodline Keeper, your Vampire Nocturnus, whatever your most important cards are, because that seems much more practical to leave up a mana, to leave up 2 mana just to protect your most important cards. So Timitar, not super excited to play as a commander, but in the 99, I'm at least going to consider this in a lot of vampire decks. Although, as I said, a little worried about the risk of leaving up a ton of mana and not using it and having it go to waste, which is the downside of this card. But this is a really powerful way to protect your vampires from removal. We also got a Rakdos partner pair of Kambar and Lauren. So Kambar, 4 mana, 3/4 black vampire rogue. It partners, of course. This has lifelink, and it says whenever a creature dies, you gain 1 life and create a blood token. And then Lauren, pretty interesting, 3 mana, 3/3 with First Strike. Partners, of course, 2 mana, sack an artifact or creature to goad target creature. So I think the big winner of this partner pair is probably Kambar. Kambar's a card that I could see playing in a lot of decks. As a partner pair, though, they're kind of interesting. Kambar can make tokens as creatures die. Then Lauren can sacrifice those tokens to go to instant speed, hopefully slam creatures into each other, make more creatures die. Because remember, Kambar triggers whenever anyone's creature die. And it doesn't even say non-token, so anything anything that dies is going to trigger this. So it is kind of a cool partner pair together. There are combos, of course. If you can, let's say, sacrifice Gravecrawler an infinite number of times to Phyrexian Altar with a Kambar out, you're going to make infinite blood tokens, gain infinite life, but that's probably more about Phyrexian Altar than it is about the partner pair. I think that this is a partner pair as far as vampires is concerned. I don't think I would just play it in a random vampire deck. I think I would definitely play it in a blood token vampire deck. So like Strefan, Anj, something like that. I think this is really good. Maybe Madness vampires as well, where you can really take advantage of the blood tokens. But in just a generic vampire deck, I'm not sure this does enough. I do think this is kind of an interesting build around. If I was going to build around this, I don't think I'd build around it as a vampire deck. I think I'd build around it as this weird artifact aristocrat deck and play a bunch of like Disciple of the Vaults in Marionette Masters, his weird artifact sort of blood artist, Reckless Fireweaver, damages opponents as artifacts come into play. You got a tag to sacrifice artifacts a little bit quicker, a little bit cheaper, and then just try to kill things or maybe combo and make a ton of blood tokens and sacrifice all the blood tokens and drain the opponent out of the game. So I think that is a really sweet way to build around it. I think Kambar also has a lot of potential in other decks. Like, it seems like a good backup to Eloise in Eloise deck. So part of the power of Eloise is it's got this infinite combo with March of the Machines. Eloise makes a clue token when a creature you control dies. March of the Machines makes non-creature artifacts into creatures with power and toughness equal to their mana cost. That means a clue token is going to be a 0/0, so it'll immediately die, which will trigger Eloise again, so it'll immediately die, and die, and die, and die, and you just keep going through that loop. Kambar does the same thing. Like Kambar, when a creature dies, you gain a life, make a blood token, so if you have Kambar in a March of the Machines and a creature dies, you start this infinite life gain loop of that blood token coming into play, being a 0/0 creature, which dies, which triggers Kambar, which then dies, which triggers Kambar, and do that again, and again, and again, and gain infinite life. So I think that as a backup to Eloise, Kambar is really sweet. Of course, March of the Machines can't work in a Kambar Lauren deck because it's the wrong colors, but in an Eloise deck, there is an easy way to play it. I think the whole partner pair also could be pretty good in the 99 of some sacrifice decks, like Korvold, where you're able to trigger Korvold with your blood tokens as they're sacrificed, and then as things are sacrificed, you make the blood tokens with Kambar, like Shattergang Bros can sack creatures, can sack artifacts, so those seem like natural homes. I also think that Lauren is kind of a natural upgrade to Goad decks, and Goad is a kind of underexplored archetype in Commander. We've been getting more and more of it, but I think it's kind of an upgrade to Kazarikar, the Eye Tyrant, another new commander which cares a lot about goading and messing with attacks. In that deck, Lauren's going to be the main reason to play the partner pair, but I think you'd probably play Kambar too, just because Kambar is really good. And remember, with these partner pairs, if you're playing them in the 99, if you cast one of them, you can find the other one from your library, so it is some natural card advantage. So I think an upgrade for Goad decks as well. So pretty sweet partner pair. I don't think it's busted. I think Kambar is a pretty scary card that has a lot of potential. As a partner pair, definitely hyped about building that Artifact Aristocrat style deck though, and I think it has a potential in the 99 in a bunch of decks, just not really vampire decks, oddly. We also got maybe my favorite card from the vampire deck, Arterial Alchemy. So 3-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you make a blood token for each opponent you have. So in Commander, that'll normally be 3 unless someone has died, and then it says blood tokens you control are equipments in addition to their other type, and have equipped creature gets +2/+0 in equip of 2. So this is a card I really want to build around is my hidden commander. I think this card can do some things. It reminds me a little bit of Bludgeon Brawl. Bludgeon Brawl, kind of the same thing, but for any non-creature. Arterial Alchemy only works with blood tokens, but that's fine. Part of the power of blood tokens is it's pretty easy to make a ton of them if you try. Like Olivia's Attendant, Chandra's Ignition can easily make over 100 blood tokens all by itself. We talked about Kambar and some of the infinite blood token combos. So Arterial Alchemy, what I'm envisioning is you play these blood token producers. It can make a ridiculous amount of blood tokens. Let's say you get 100 blood tokens on the battlefield, which again, this isn't Magical Christmas Land. There's easy 2-card combos that can do that. Blood tokens are pretty cheap and easy to make. So let's say you get 100 blood tokens, then you play Arterial Alchemy to make them all into equipments. Then you can like Volshulk Battlemaster and equip them all for free. You can Pure Steel Paladin and equip them all for free. You can Fighter Class level up and equip them all for free. Happens to be just the right discount to make blood tokens equipped for free. Sneaky wizards, I see what you're doing there with Fighter Class. So you equip them all for free, and then you have creatures that care about being equipped. You have like Valduk, you have Kemba, you have Wylith, which I think would be the best commander for this deck. You just put all those 100 blood tokens on Wylith and attack with it. Maybe not quite 100 because you'd mill yourself, but you get to attack with it and draw a ridiculous amount of cards. So I actually think Arterial Alchemy, sure, you could just play it in a vampire deck that makes a bunch of blood tokens and equip those blood tokens naturally. That's probably fine. But as a hidden commander in some of these weird equipment shenanigans decks, I actually think this card is spectacular and going to be amazingly fun to build around. We also got Sinister Waltz, which I think is pretty bad. 5 mana sorcery, choose 3 target creatures in your graveyard, return 2 of them at random to the battlefield, other one goes to the bottom of your library. So essentially for 5 mana, you reanimate 2 things, although you don't have complete control over what you're reanimating. You're getting 2 of 3 things that you choose. So the reason I don't think this card is all that good, number 1 is Ever After exists. Ever After, it just reanimates 2 things, like any 2 things for 1 more mana, for 6 mana, and Ever After doesn't even really see much play in Commander. It's just not really good enough. Victimize reanimates 2 things. You do got to sacrifice something. But Sinister Waltz, I mean, I guess you're getting a slight discount on Ever After, but you're in 2 colors and you're not necessarily getting your 2 best things. You're getting 2 of your 3 best things. There's just so much cheap reanimation in Commander. Reanimates, animate dead, persist, that I don't think you need a card like this. If you're going to play expensive reanimation, you're probably going to try to get up to things like Rise of the Dark Realms and just reanimate everything. So I think Sinister Waltz, probably a fine reanimation spell for the precon deck itself, but as far as outside the realm of precon Commander, I think we just got better options. We also got a sweet combo vampire in Scion of Opulence. 3 mana, 3/1 Vampire Noble. Whenever it or another non-token vampire you control dies, you make a treasure, and then you pay 1, sack 2 artifacts, exile the top card of your library, you can play that card this turn. So the last ability, that's a nice little bonus. I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on the Pitiless Plunderer text. Pitiless Plunderer is a combo piece that has been dying to be broken for a long, long time. It costs 4 mana, but it has a very similar ability. It does exactly what Scion does, except for any creature. Scion of Opulence, it has a ton of potential in Commander. For 1, it's kind of protection against removal and Wrath. If your opponent Wraths your board, well, at least you're getting a bunch of treasures, which is nice. Sure, it's not the same as saving all your creatures, but still, you're getting something left over as your creatures die. More exciting is the combo potential of this card. So Scion of Opulence, it goes infinite in a really funny way with a bunch of other vampires. So most important piece is Oathsworn Vampire. Oathsworn Vampire, a 2 mana 2/2 that you can cast from your graveyard if you gain life this turn. So let's say we got, our Scion going. We got an Oathsworn Vampire. Then we can get down stuff like Blood Artist or Falkenrath Noble that drain whenever a creature dies. So that's going to give us the life gain we need for our Oathsworn Vampire to cast it from the graveyard. Then all we need is a sack outlet. If we throw Phyrexian Altar into this mix, what we do is we sack the Oathsworn Vampire. That makes a mana. We get a treasure from Scion Opulence. That makes another mana. That's enough mana to recast Oathsworn Vampire. So we do it again, and we do it again, and that's going to trigger Blood Artist or Falkenrath Noble an infinite number of times along the way. We can even do it with any sacrifice outlet, like a Viscera Seer, if we have another way to make mana, like Pawn of Ulamog. Pawn of Ulamog, when it or another non-token dies, you make a Eldrazi spawn that you can sacrifice. So you can do the same combo. You sacrifice the Oathsworn Vampire to the Viscera Seer. That's going to trigger the Blood Artist, gain life, so you can cast Oathsworn from the graveyard. You're going to get an Eldrazi spawn that makes a mana. You're going to get a treasure that makes a mana. So you cast Oathsworn Vampire again, do it again, do it again, and do it again. And as you can see, these are all vampires. It's perfectly on tribe. If you're playing a vampire deck, you can slot this into any vampire deck. And many of the cards are fine on their own, like sack outlets are fine. Pawn of Ulamog, Scion, or good Wrath Protection, Blood Artist, and Falkenrath Nobles, kind of Commander staples there. So it's not like you even got to play a ton of bad cards. So I love this card. I think it's fine when played fairly, is Wrath Protection, removal protection, a bit of ramp, a way to maybe draw some cards. And I also think it's a really sweet combo piece that is amazingly perfectly on tribe for vampires. We also got Midnight Arsonist, another card that I don't think is all that good. 4 mana 3/2 vampire. When it enters a battlefield, destroy up to X target artifacts without mana abilities, where X is the number of vampires you control. So on one hand, this in a vampire deck can easily come down and blow up 10 artifacts or something. Vampires, like Edgar is so good at making tokens. Vampires can go really, really wide, really, really quick. So this could be blow up every single artifact. The problem is the without mana abilities restriction. If you look at artifacts that are played in Commander, a huge percentage of them have mana abilities. They are mana rocks of one form or another, soul rings and signets. Those are the artifacts that see play. I actually went through EDH Rec and looked through the top 50 artifacts. What you're seeing now with Lightning Greaves and Skull Clamp and Bolas' Citadel and Wayfarer's Bauble and Fizzle, these are the only artifacts in the top 50 that don't have mana abilities. So that means this is not actually going to blow up that many artifacts. You're going to cast this and you're going to have the ability to blow up 10 artifacts attacks or something, but in reality, you're going to hit a Lightning Greaves, or maybe another equipment, or if you're lucky in the late game, a Bolas's Citadel, but all your opponent's mana rocks are going to survive. So I feel like that restriction basically just kills this card. We also got a 6-drop vampire, Markov Enforcer, 6 mana, 6/6 vampire soldier. When another vampire enters a battlefield under your control, it fights up to one target creature an opponent controls, and whenever a creature dealt damage by Markov Enforcer dies this turn, you make a blood token. So Markov Enforcer, it's basically Vampire Thorn Mammoth. Thorn Mammoth, it's been around for a while now, going back to Eldraine, and it just really doesn't see play. It's got the same stats, it is 1 more mana, it doesn't make blood tokens, but it gets trampled, but it does the same exact thing. I'm actually a little skeptical that this is going to be worth it. I mean, I guess the good news is, as we talked about before, vampires are good at making a bunch of tokens, and this doesn't say non-tokens, so you can make Edgar tokens and be fighting things down. You're probably only going to fight one thing a turn, or you're going to end up killing your Markov Enforcer. I just don't know if there's too much competition at the top end of the vampire curve. That's kind of where I'm at with this card. Yeah, it's cute, it's nice, I like that it makes blood tokens, but you could be playing Sengers or Necropolite Regents or Patron of the Veins. There's a lot of expensive, powerful vampires that might be better than this. That said, I do like this card in decks that specifically care about blood tokens. This is another one of those cards that, would I play it in a generic vampire deck? Maybe not. Would I play it in Strefan or Anj Maid of Dishonor or our new partner pair? Then the answer is probably yes, because those commanders just really care about blood tokens, and the blood token upside, which in other decks is kind of nice. I can cycle a random bad card, you know, discard a land, hopefully draw something better. In an actual blood token deck, that goes way, way up in value. So Markov Enforcer, I think it's a little too expensive to show up in generic vampire decks, but probably a sweet option on the top end of the curve in blood token vampire decks. We also got Imposing Grandeur, pretty sweet card for high mana value commanders. 5 mana sorcery, each player may discard their hand and draw cards equal to the greatest mana value of a commander that they own on the battlefield or in the command zone. So essentially, if you're playing an expensive commander, this card can be very powerful. It's the red version of Stinging Study, which also 5 mana, draws you cards and loses you life equal to the mana value of your commander. It's got a bit of like Windfall thrown in. I think this card is really, really interesting. One of the best thing Wizards has done in the last couple of sets is added this small sub-theme of cards that specifically support high mana value commanders, including Imposing Grandeur. Imposing Grandeur, if you're playing Zakamas or Miosians or Reaper Kings or the Ur-Dragons, it's going to be insane. 5 mana, discard your hand, draw 10, draw 9. That is a really, really strong deal, and these are, in general, discounting the Ur-Dragon, which I know is busted because of Eminence, but in general, expensive commanders are worse than cheap commanders because you can't cast them multiple times, they die, you can't get them back on the battlefield, so they could use some help. People tend to go cheaper and cheaper with their commanders the more we learn about and play the format, so giving these expensive commanders that are at a disadvantage compared to cheaper commanders some help, I think, is a really, really good thing. How good is Imposing Grandeur, though? I think that's really up for debate. I think if you're playing one of these like 9-10 mana value commanders, it's going to be really, really good. Your opponent's commanders are probably going to be cheaper than yours. You're going to discard your hand, draw 9 or 10 cards. Your opponents are either going to choose not to use it at all, or they're going to draw much less cards than you. Once you get on like 7 mana commanders, let's say Drakuseth, is this better than a Wheel of Fortune? I'm actually not sure. Like, on one hand, they do the exact same thing for your deck. You discard your hand, you draw 7 cards. Imposing Grandeur is more mana. I know there's budget concerns here, but discounting the budget concerns. So for yourself, you're essentially getting a 5 mana Wheel of Fortune. On the other hand, you can still kind of break the symmetry. Like, let's say your opponent's commanders are much cheaper, then they might not choose to use it. If your opponent's playing a Gaddock Teeg or something, a 2 mana commander, they're probably not going to discard their hand and draw 2. That would be silly, so your opponent's not going to get any benefit out of it, which is kind of nice. So I think it really depends on your play group. It depends on your commander. I think if you're playing 9 and 10 mana commanders, I would probably include this pretty much every time. If you're playing a 7 mana commander, I think it's still a good budget replacement for Wheel of Fortune, but I think that Wheel of Fortune, in general, I would probably prefer it if budget was the same. Although, like I said, you probably still will get more value out of it because your opponents are probably playing cheaper commanders. Once you get down below 7 to 6, 5, 4 mana commanders, then I think this isn't really even in the conversation. The other place where this could be interesting is in specific commanders that care about you drawing your discarding cards, like the Locust God Nimbus at Perun. They just want you to to draw a ton of cards. That is the reason to play these commanders. Even though you're only drawing 6 because Locust got his 6 mana or Niv is at 6 mana, it still might be worth it just as another pseudo wheel in your deck. Like Riel, sure, it's only 3 mana, so you're not going to draw many cards with Imposing Grandeur, but Riel's going to draw you a bunch of cards from discarding cards, so it might be worth it there as well. So Imposing Grandeur, I think, a staple or close to it for really expensive commanders. I think it's good with medium mana value commanders. Low mana value commanders, not very good, but I like that we get another pseudo wheel replacement. One of the things that bothers me most about Commander right now is the expensive Wheel of Fortune, and even though this is a very narrow, not as good, more expensive Wheel of Fortune, this still is a pseudo replacement. This is going to cost you 1/1000th of the price of an actual Wheel of Fortune. Next up, we have Shadow Grange Archfiend, a 7-mana 8/4 demon that when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacks a creature they control with the greatest power, and you gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures sacrificed this way, and then you can madness it for 3 mana and paying 8 life. Of course, paying 8 life, not that big of a deal, because hopefully you're going to gain most of that back with Archfiend on its own. So Shadow Grange Archfiend, a weird card for the Vampire deck. This deck, I mean, it doesn't have any straight up madness synergies, although you can certainly madness this into play off of a blood token, which I think is the idea for the precon. Like, cheating this into play, sacking a blood token for 1 mana and playing this for 3 mana, that's pretty sweet and pretty powerful. Probably the best comparison is its effect is basically Zat's Will, or one of the modes of Zat's Will, with a little bit of consume from Concentrate Consumes thrown in. As far as where I'd play this, outside of the blood token decks, which I think is what it's designed for, to power up Strefan and the other blood token commanders, seems really good in madness style vampire decks like Anj or Olivia. Also just any other commanders that can discard Chainer or Rankle. Like, when you're casting this for 3 mana, I think this is a really powerful effect. Eating your opponent's biggest creature for 3 mana and getting 8/4 body left behind, and theoretically not losing any life, because hopefully someone has a creature that's big enough that you're going to gain at least most of that life back. That's really good. So this seems staple level for decks that can consistently discard it, like madness decks. Also kind of cute in like Veto. Veto, I don't know if you can discard it. We'd have to figure out a way to discard it, but Veto cares about the life gain. So you can play this, get rid of your opponent's big creatures, gain back, 4, 5, 6, 10 life, and then also drain your opponent for that much, which seems like it could be pretty powerful. Also probably in the conversation for Turgid. Again, it's 7 mana, it's a little bit expensive, but if we can find a way to discard it for 3, it's kind of insane, and Turgid cares about your opponent sacrificing stuff. Like, this is come down, steal your opponent's 3 best creatures if you got Turgid on the battlefield. So Shadow Grange Archfiend, I really like this card. Seems great for blood token decks, for madness decks, for sacrifice themed decks, maybe for some life gain shenanigan decks as well. If you can find a way to consistently be madnessing it, it is a really powerful card. And some of those decks like Turgid, even if you gotta pay full price and cast it for 7 mana, it's probably still not really the end of the world, although it is a little bit less exciting at 7 mana. We also got new vampire ultra stable Olivia's Wrath. This card is absurd. 5 mana sorcery. Each non-vampire creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of vampires you control. This card is crazy. Vampires, especially Edgar vampires, really good at going wide. This can easily be a 5 mana Plague Wind, not hurting your creatures at all, destroying all of your opponent's creatures, and it even is -X, so it gets around indestructibility. It is like a super damnation. I don't know why you would not play this card. If you are playing vampires, I think you play this card. I don't care if it's Strefan, I don't care if it's Olivia Crimsonbide. I mean, it's probably best with Edgar just because Edgar's so good at making so many vampires, but I think this is just an insane card. Like, Plague Wind at 5 mana, getting around indestructibility, that is absurd. It's going to leave your board behind so you can swing in and attack and kill people. It is probably the best vampire card that we've seen from this entire set that's just going to show up in like 100% of vampire decks in Commander. We also got Predator's Hour. This card is pretty aggressively costed. 2 mana until end of turn, creatures you control gain menace. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library face down. You may look at it and play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you can spend mana as though it was mana of any color to cast this spell. So this is sort of like a Ragavad, a super Ragavad. Turn all of your creatures, minus the treasure token, into Ragavans until end of turn. Plus you get the menace out of it. Also a little bit like Curse of Hospitality. The trigger is very similar, but Curse of Hospitality allows everyone to do that to whoever's cursed. This is just for you. So I imagine you play Edgar and you make a bunch of tokens and you play Predator's Hour and steal a ton of cards from your opponent's deck and draw like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 cards for 2 mana, some really absurd number of cards. So that actually seems very, very powerful. So I think that especially go-wide vampire decks might want this. Edgar, Elenda, decks that can make a ton of vampire tokens is where this is going to be at its best. But really, this might not even be a vampire card. This might be an upgrade for some other recent commanders. One of the things it seemed like Wizards has been trying to do with these decks is synergize with commanders from past decks that could use more support. Like, we got Nihilor in Prosper with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms a couple of months ago. This card seems perfect for both of those. Like, Nihilor is a new theft commander that cares about you stealing your opponent's creatures and attacking with them. Prosper cares about you casting stuff out of exile. Predator's Hour seems perfect for both of those. Like, play a bunch of creatures, steal a bunch of stuff for Nihilor, get a bunch of stuff to cast from exile with Prosper. Also seems really good in essentially any theft style deck. If you're playing Gonti, like, that's the first thing I thought of. What a great Gonti card, or Send Triplets, or Dragonlord Sunguard, or like Zarasan the Trickster, any deck that's built around trying to steal and win with your opponent's cards, as long as you got a decent number of creatures. If you're playing Send Triplets control with like Send Triplets and 3 creatures and a ton of spells, then this isn't going to do anything. But as long as you're playing a decent amount of creatures, this card's going to be insane in any theft deck. So I love this card. I think this card's going to be really popular. Players love stealing their opponent's stuff, and it kind of shocks me this card's just 2 mana. I would expect this to be 4 mana or something like that. So Wizards costed this card very, very aggressively, and I think we're going to see a decent amount of it in theft decks and other go-wide decks as a card advantage spell that also has the upside of just getting your opponent and stealing their stuff in Commander. We also got a little artifact, Glass Case Heart. 3 mana artifact. Whenever one or more vampires you control attacks, make a blood token, pay 1, pay a life, make a 1/1 white and black vampire creature token with lifelink, pay 2 and tap it, sacrifice it in 13 blood tokens to deal 13 to each opponent, and you gain 13 life. So Glass Cast Heart, this card's cool. I think the card design is really, really sweet. How strong it is, I don't really know. Essentially, each turn, if you're playing a vampire deck, you should hopefully be getting a blood token. And then for the cost of 1 mana each turn, you're essentially getting a Bitter Blossom with the downside that your creatures aren't flying, but the upside that they gain lifelink, so you can gain back some of the life you're spending. And then you get this bonus ability where if you get up to 13 blood tokens, you can 13 the table. A little disappointed you got to sacrifice it because 13 isn't really enough to win the game in Commander. It's not 40, like players start at 40 life. I don't think this is just going to be lethal. And since you got to sack the Glass Cast Heart as well, you're not going to be able to do it again the next turn, or at least without jumping through some really big hoops of like reanimating it from the graveyard or something. So I think this card, the design is really sweet, and it does offer a little bit of value if you're playing a blood token style deck. So I don't know. I think in general, the card's probably not good enough for normal vampires, but if you're playing a blood token deck in specific, then it's kind of a cool option, even if 13 damage might not be enough to kill opponents. Last but not least, today we got Crossways Troublemaker, 5 mana 5/5 vampire. Attacking vampires you control have Death Touch and Lifelink, and whenever a vampire you control dies, you can pay 2 life if you do draw a card. So this card, it's definitely super sweet, but again, we've talked about this before. 6 mana is a lot. You can only afford so many 6 drops. Once you get up to 6+ mana in Commander, you're kind of getting to game-winning effects where you play this and it can either immediately or theoretically win the game. I don't think Crossways Troublemaker does that. I think Crossways Troublemaker, it's sweet. It's going to gain you a bunch of life. It's going to make it hard for your opponent to block. If they wrath your board, you can spend some of the life you gain to draw some cards. So it is a sweet value card. I just wonder if 6 mana is too much. The most obvious home for this card, though, I think is in Veto. In Veto, this card seems absolutely absurd. We're giving all of your vampires lifelink is going to gain you a ton of life. Your opponent can't really block easily because of Death Touch, and that's going to trigger Veto to hit your opponent for a ridiculous amount of damage. You'll probably just close out the game. So it's a card that I think is probably a staple in Veto if you get a bunch of creatures, but as far as just playing it normal vampires, we'll have to wait and see. My guess is this is a card that I will try because I like it and I think it's a sweet design, but I'll probably end up cutting it for something a little bit cheaper because 6 mana, even though the card's powerful, is just a lot for this effect. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Crimson Vow Commander spoiler. So what do you think? You've seen all the cards from all the decks. Which deck are you getting? Which one are you most excited for? What card are you going to use to upgrade your other decks? What do you want to build around these cards? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.